Chairman Miller, members of the subcommittees. Thanks for the opportunity to give you our views on the impact on seniors. As we've heard up until now, the impacts are huge. The Clean Power Plan was estimated to have an impact, a nominal impact of about maybe 10%. Now we know that the numbers are huge, much larger than that. I'll lay out what we studied, what the results of our analysis are. But the fact is, seniors in Virginia are in the lowest rung. The impacts of any increase in energy costs, be it electricity or natural gas, are huge, and they don't have the capacity to respond. You've heard manufacturing interests say they can make adjustments, they can make investments, but seniors don't have the opportunity. You know, fixed income, totally different deal. We are based in Alexandria. We have roughly 157,000 supporters in Virginia. Senator John Thune has called the CPP backdoor natural energy tax. We agree. CPP is part of the war on seniors. We've seen it over and over again. Here's a summary of my extended comments. EPA has doubled down on bad policy. EPA's new power plant rule, which was alluded to earlier by the Attorney General's office, will eliminate coal for the foreseeable future. That's because of the carbon capture requirement. There's no way to capture it that you can afford, no way to transport it, and nowhere to put it. So for now, coal is out. The new rule, layered on top of this existing plant rule, the existing plant rule is in addition to other rules that will impose regressive taxes on seniors. The EPA rules will affect the price of natural gas for all consumers, not just manufacturing operations. At every rung, residential, businesses, industrial, and in fact, one of the problems that we have only roughly 40% of the natural gas that we need inside the state, so we have to depend on new pipelines. Your question about infrastructure is huge because that has a huge impact on the way you do the economics. The rules will affect electricity imports from the PJM. You cannot make the assumption that the PJM is going to have all this electricity just waiting for us to buy it at low cost. You've already made a comment on that. And all these studies that have been done at least try to estimate what's going to happen in the grid and across the nation, because you have to back up and say, if I can't get it in Virginia, I've got to go someplace else. So all the modeling that has been done actually has to estimate what the impact's going to be. Now, if you understand that EPA is kind of has their thumb on the scale, they don't want high costs to show up. We've heard, we have a guy by the name of Uber who said it's not going to cost very much. We have the same deal. EPA has told us that our prices are going to go down. We disagree. We've got studies that show that. Now, first, some data on Virginia seniors. In 2012, seniors 65 and older accounted for 22% of Virginia's 3 million households. 40% of the senior households had an average annual income of $17,000 before taxes. 60% of senior households had an average annual income of $25,000 before taxes. So we're talking about 60% are struggling. They're at the threshold of poverty plus 130%. That's kind of the trigger for when they get federal aid called lighting. Electricity accounts for 60% of average senior energy costs. Natural gas and other fuels are the balance. The time frame for our economic analysis covers roughly 2017 to 2031, basically the first 15 years of this policy. Near Economic Consulting estimates the CPP will increase total consumer costs of electricity and natural gas by $370 billion to $480 billion. That's real money, real money. Now the electricity costs that they estimated would go up roughly 17% in the same time frame. We heard today the SEC said no, the rate increases will come closer to 20+%. So the upper range of the number provided by the study on a national level roughly lines up with what we've got here in Virginia per the SEC staff. Average Virginia electricity costs will increase by 11% over that period. Now, that was a study. We went from a national study, you download some data, try to figure out what's going on in Virginia. And the problem is the limitation of those models doesn't have enough discrete detail to figure out which power plants, how much transmission, the stranded costs. So it kind of estimates what's going on. The study that we used assumed 11% in Virginia, and you heard today the number's closer to 20%, twice that. These cost increases are in addition to a 3% average natural increase because of a 2011 rule by EPA to control mercury. So we have a 3.1% going to hit us in the pocket, another 11% or 20% by the proposal. Then we have more to come because EPA said, oh, we forgot about ozone. We have a new proposal. You can see another 15% increase. So we're talking about roughly 30% natural increase because of EPA rules alone, notwithstanding anything else. Adding to the misery for seniors, EPA projects that the CPP will increase natural gas prices up to 11.5% by 2050. We heard today that that number is 3 times too low. It's going to be 3 times higher, 30% increase in natural gas. So we're really saying that seniors depend on energy to survive. Seniors, you had a story about what happened in your district. Seniors are very vulnerable. They need to be protected from EPA, and hopefully you can do that job. Happy to answer any questions you have.
Are there any questions? Thank you very, very much. And one last one, Frank, if you could be brief, but talk to us a little bit about federal funding for LIHEAP. For those not familiar, it's the Low-Income Heating Assistance Program that Virginia operates using federal funds that provides subsidies for those that are on the lower end of the spectrum to be able to afford their energy bills. Frank?
Mr. Chairman, at the December 17th meeting, I was asked to supply subcommittees with information on the level of LIHEAP funding in the federal government. The very short answer is on October 15th of last year, the Federal Department of Health and Human Services, through their Administration for Children and Families, made the awards to grantees based on the Appropriation Act for the federal fiscal year 2015. And Virginia's award is $73.4 million. And that's the answer. I'm sure you want some context for it.
Yes.
That's roughly 10% less than what was received in the previous year. And the amount varies by states. I've got a handout which probably provides more information than you'd ever want to know about the LIHEAP program, but it is somewhat a confusing program. You can say, well, the state's getting $73 million for LIHEAP, but LIHEAP in and of itself has 4 programs. The largest of which is the Fuel Assistance Program. There's which states have some flexibility within the grant amount as to how it's allocated between the 4 programs with some parameters. For example, the maximum amount that can be used for weatherization is 15% unless there's a waiver, and Virginia uses 15% for weatherization. On the other 3 programs, Fuel Assistance, for the last figures we have, 2014, 53% of our allocation went for heating assistance, 20% for cooling assistance, another approximately 10% went for crisis assistance. So within that bucket, that block grant, money goes for different purposes. Now, there are 2 great resources that are available within the Department of Social Services, which administers the heating, cooling, and crisis programs. Andrea Gregg is in charge of that. She has been a wonderful source of information for me, and her contact information is in my handout. On the weatherization side, it's somewhat different because that 15% is administered by the Department of Housing and Community Development. And the information for Willie Fobbs is there if there are specific questions about those programs. I've included on page 1 and 2 information for those specific programs, such as the average amount of the benefits that was awarded for the last 2 years, the number of households that received the benefits, what those benefits can be used for, and what the time periods are for applying for the grants through your local Department of Social Services. For example, there's a window for applying for heating assistance. That window ran from the second Tuesday in October through the second Friday in November. It's already passed, so if there's a heating issue, to the extent it arises, a crisis assistance may be available. That may be hitting more down in the weeds than what you specifically want. The other thing to remember is, I don't know if you recall this, Senator, but the Commission on Electric Utility Regulation, as it used to be known, had a Citizens Advisory Board that spent several years looking at this issue of funding for low-income programs. It wasn't limited to light heat, but it looked globally at utilities programs such as neighbor to neighbor, as well as municipal programs, other charitable programs, and that devolved into a mandate that the Department of Social Services do a report. Used to be annual, now it's biennial, on the effectiveness of these low-income energy assistance programs. Because the report's done biennially, the last one came out in November of 2013. A new one will be coming out in December 1st, I believe it is, of this year. If you want copies of the old report, Mary Beth has some there to hand out, but because it's somewhat dated, I wanted to give you more information. Since my charge was to look at the current level of federal funding is. The funding level that I gave you, as with a lot of federal funds, it's somewhat complicated because there's the federal block grant, but they also allocate emergency contingency funds from time to time, so that target may change. There are some leveraging programs and other challenge programs that they run, so sometimes comparing numbers to numbers is not exactly an apples-to-apples comparison. But as I mentioned, for this year, the total allocation to all states was $3.05 billion, of which, as I mentioned, Virginia got $73 million, to be specific, $73,383,108, which is, as I'm sure you figured it out, 2.4% of the total. That really hasn't changed very much over the last 10 years or so. It's 2.4% last year, 2.4% before that. It's ranged from a low of about 1.7% up to a high of 2.5%. And one of the tables in the back shows what the percentage is for other states and how their allocations compare. So if you're interested in that aspect of it. But when they make that allocation of $3 billion among the states, the formula that they use that looks at things like the current and historic shares of home energy expenditures by low-income households, changes in temperature, fuel source prices, the number of low-income households in each state, and they crunch the numbers and come out with the figure. Now, on page 4, there's an interesting chart I found which talks about light heat funding historically. It doesn't go back, well, it goes back as far as 1981. And you can see that of course this is not adjusted for inflation, but it was about $2 billion total through the early to mid 80s, fell off in the late 80s, and then spiked starting in 2009, 10, 11 at $5 billion. So it's quite a large influx of dollars from the program. It's fallen back now from the high of include emergency funds of $5 billion down to $3 billion. So it's a pretty sharp drop compared to what it was 3 or 4 years ago. But historically, it's sort of settling back into the trend that it was over the last decade. On page 5, I have some information on eligibility criteria. The federal government has some rules that say that a state's threshold